So we heard about the challenges and threats that Europe will face in the next decades. It is a bit, I don't know, not depressing, but it's actually worrying. Another topic, and not everything has to be worrying actually, there are some very positive messages as well. In the second part of this conference, we will look at people. We will focus on people and the social impact of these new digital technologies, why some of them are very easily accepted, others are not. And so we will discuss that in a panel discussion. But to set the scene, we'll have two presentations that we will keep at 10 minutes, and then we will let you interact with the speakers. And I'd like also to involve the audience, so keep preparing questions, and I'll come to you in a little while. So I have the pleasure to introduce you to our first presenter, Pille Pruulmann-Vengerfeldt. You're a professor of media and communications at University of Malmö, and you're going to speak about societal acceptance of secure multi-party computation. Looking forward to hearing what this is. Welcome.
Thank you very much. As I said, my name is Pille Pruulmann-Vengerfeldt. I'm originally from Estonia, so I'm going to boost now a bit of Estonian technologies, but I am a social scientist or media and communication scientist. My passion is around audiences, around people, so that's going to be the core of my talk. But I'm going to do that in a true scientist nature. I'm going to talk about a research project that we did. And this is a research project that we conducted together with an Estonian private company called Cybernetica, who introduced or who explored the possibility of secure multi-party computation as a future and emerging technology. So you could ask, okay, I'm not really sure what secure multi-party computation is. And the simple answer could be, okay, it's privacy by design as Lisa wanted it, and it's data analysis as Jaak wanted it. So in principle, it's doing exactly what the previous panel asked, but we're not really using it. And here's to why. So secure multi-party computation is a way to compute data without actually sharing it across different parties. So in order for it actually to be secure, you need at least 3 parties. These 3 parties can be, in ideal case, competitors who are really not that keen on sharing information amongst each other, who really have vested interest to keep everything private, and for whom the whole idea of cooperation doesn't really add into the values or into the discussions. So in a simple discussion, it's 3 data miners or data providers as well. There are organizations, groups, where the data meets without, so there is no encryption and decryption process within that data, but only parts of the data are shared. So as in that circle in the middle, the blue and the yellow and the red become black when overlapped. And we can only overlap material that's, or we can only see our own data and the computations. Sounds like a perfect solution to situations where we have a lot of private data that we wish to compute, but don't necessarily wish to share. The technology has been out there from a mathematical point of view, or from cryptographic point of view, since late 80s. There have been a few practical tests on it, and Sharemind, the Estonian company, or Estonian brand for a company called Cybernetica, has made it actually a viable product. So you can compute. Previously in the 80s, the computing power was a problem. Any reasonable computation would take so long time that you can't actually do it. But now we have computation that can do it. We have problems aplenty, one would argue. But there are still several serious adoption barriers to this discussion. And in the furthest away from me is another example how secure multi-party computation could work, where you have different miners. These are the ones working, holding the data, and registry can provide data for it. It can be different competing companies, it can be state registries, it can be quite a few different ways of doing that. And that could be a researcher or interested party or a concerned citizen who could then get an answer to their question. These solutions, and there are a few other additional models that we did, we went around to 25 different organizations in Europe, a lot of them in Estonia, but also quite a few in different other countries, trying to figure out, okay, if we have this nifty technology that seems to do so cool things, where's the applicational situation? Where could we really use it, on the one hand, and what kind of problems or barriers do we need to overcome in order for this to be seriously useful? So this is the first problem. Capabilities of the technology. What is that a technology can do? And that, of course, in the minds of technology-oriented people, the programmers, the people working in IT, this is their first challenge. They have to first make a technology that does the thing, that works. So affordances are a concept where it's not only about what technology can do, but what people understand the technology can do. And that's where it gets a bit complicated with things like secure multi-party computation or high-end cryptography. The more complicated terms we use, the more math equations we need to show people in order to validate, the more difficult it gets. People don't really perceive that much how that technology can really help them. And it's also very important to understand that new technologies are inevitably viewed within the existing frameworks of understandings. So if I go around telling people about secure multi-party technology, they're saying, oh, is it like anonymization? No, it's not actually anonymization. Is it like crypting and decrypting? People are clever already, they know that there is this kind of nifty technology. No, it's not really that as well. And then it's sort of another boundary to overcome is to how to put that technology, whatever technology it is, into an existing analytical framework. Where can we understand that? We are stuck in some of those existing frameworks continuously. If you think about your computer screen, that's a very clear replica of a paper. And we still sometimes treat it as paper. So we file it away, or we put it in a bin with the icon as a bin. We might not have ever seen a paper bin that looks like that. But we recognize that within our existing framework of social understanding. So that's a challenge that we need to overcome. And the problem is, of course, that people have never had to conceptualize privacy or data breach before, not in such a magnitude, not in such a enormous capabilities. And sometimes when our brains are confronted with too complicated things, we just shut down. We just like, la, 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 not really caring, not really interested, no. So, and then we also think, okay, how's that fitting with the way I'm doing things? How's that fitting with my existing practices? I was thinking about Jaak's example of the computer recognition of benign and dangerous skin things. How many doctors do you think would go, yeah, give me this technology? No, that doesn't really fit in their existing practice. Their existing practice is not there. Of course, I'm absolutely sure that there are many enthusiastic, innovative doctors who will say, yes, please give me that technology, my patients will survive, everyone will be happy. But there are also lots of doctors who will say, no, this is not how we do things in medicine. A computer cannot take over things that we do in medicine. So it's not only about what a technology can do, but what we recognize
the technology to be able to do. And then our additional concerns. That was just the technology. And now we get into the murky, social sciencey, complicated stuff where there is no clear answer or no straightforward pathway. So there are contextual concerns, and there are user-perceived needs. So contextual concerns is the context sensitivity of any given technology. In our example of secure multiparty computation, our interviewees indicated different kinds of contexts. If you want to get a technology accepted in military, make sure that the boss in the highest command says this is important, and then it will trickle down. Some other sectors, they kind of like there is a central boss who says how things should be done, does not work. That's not how their context is rationalized. That's not how things are done. So there are institutional, social, and legal contexts. And one of the sort of barriers that secure multiparty computation is still overcoming is that the lawyers need to put that in a language that they understand. So they need to actually legalize this kind of practices that would make sense in their world. And then it's also peers, like how do other companies doing? I want to be innovative, I want to have the edge, but maybe not too much, because then I'm going to pay a lot for having that edge. Sector-based preferences. This is how it's always done in our sector was actually one of the things that we heard a lot in those interviews. This is how things are, and yeah, disruptive technologies are nice, but if a disruptive technology will, for instance, put a state statistics office, the whole office of centralized statistics collection, it could be out of business. They're not that keen on innovating on their working practices. And I'm absolutely confident that we still need state statistics office. But their perception of the technology firsthand is, no, it's going to change too much the way we work. So that is all going to influence that. And then it's also dependent on understanding of social and situational context. Like, I'm okay with some loss of privacy. I'm okay to give Facebook all my data as long as I can share and like and click and see all those lovely kitten videos. Because that's what a lot of you are doing, or me included. I'm okay by, for instance, solving all those recognition images, pictures, because I want to get access, and they have used the CAPTCHA, which is teaching the artificial intelligence. And I could say, no, that's actually free use of my labor, but I want to get to the other side, so I'm going to do the CAPTCHA thing. So I'm going to teach the AI. I'm going to take a minute and teach the AI. So there are a lot of things where we are saying, okay, we realize that you are preaching our privacy. We realize that there are better ways, but I'm happy the way it is because I'm not really that keen of learning new things. And my peer pressure is actually pushing me towards publicizing stuff instead of privatizing stuff. So anything we can do? This is my last slide to sort of say some of these uncertainty conditions can be navigated. There is one possible solution, has another fancy name, strategic niche management, where radical technologies like this need to be protected before the market will say, no, we don't really want them. They really need to be protected, and they can be protected, sometimes with legislative practices, sometimes within a specific sector, sometimes within a small country like Estonia. You can say, okay, we're going to test it, and we're going to demonstrate that it's solid, it's secure, it's cool, and then you might want to sort of adopt it as well. So state sector and state and private enterprises cooperation is really oftentimes the key to get this off the ground, to get different technologies off the ground, especially the ones that can be perceived as threatening to our existing practices and really confusing to our existing understanding. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pille. Why don't you take a seat, and can I ask the panel to come on stage, please? And I'll introduce you as you sit, please. So Ray Pinto, first, Director for Policy at Digital Europe, is our Cecilia for tonight. So, she's in the middle. So unfortunately, Cecilia had a last-minute problem to come. So Ray is coming. Mariagrazia Squicciarini, you're head of unit in the unit dealing with science, technology, and innovation at the OECD. Linnar, Viik, you have many titles. You're co-founder and program director at the Estonian e-Governance Academy. You're also a member of a number of boards, but we'll come to that in a minute. And Doris Schroecker, you're head of unit in the Directorate dealing with industrial technologies at DG Research, European Commission. Thank you all for joining us today. Maybe, do you want to address some of the issues that Pille raised? I have a lot of questions, but maybe if one of you wants to start.
Indeed. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And we're still here physically, so it's very nice to talk to you directly. So coming from the research and innovation perspective, there's always the question like, is the uptake quick enough? Are we at the edge? How does it help us? Exactly what you addressed. It's one of the big issues for us, for innovation in general. How fast are research results, are new technologies being taken up in the industry and by people? Now, on the digital side, we have what you said. Many people are using them already, but once you want to have some kind of structured uptake, you get these kind of questions. So my question is, you try to understand the user, but how much should the user know about that? What's the limit? And how much does the user need to understand from this black box thing to trust it?
And that differs across different users on the one hand, and it also differs across the different applications. And the key, of course, is what do I get in return? So there are applications which are forever going to be contested, and no matter how much validation by state, by private companies, by again, research, go look through all the mathematical formulas, how we think this black box works, or how we've made this black box to work, you're going to still say, no, this is not for me. And I think that's one of the things we really have to accept, because that's everyone's right to say, thank you very much, I appreciate the efforts you're making in digitalizing things, that's not really for me. So that's one of the challenges I think we find from the political level really difficult to accept, because again, we would like to have a uniform access. We would like to have uniform acceptance of all these nifty technologies, because that will allow us to transform the services. That will allow us, we can argue that it allows us to give much better service, much cooler things. But I think at the same time, we really have to accept that there will be people who will say, and sometimes they get to say later, I told you so, that this is not okay technology to accept for them. And thus, I cannot sort of prescribe you to a good brainwashing technology as to how to really make everyone to agree that what is cool is really cool.
Okay. So building up on Doris' question, actually, what about, who needs to accept the technology? You mentioned the lawyers, you mentioned the doctors. Can they be intermediaries? If doctors accept the technology, the patients will automatically accept them better, don't you think?
Of course, there are situations where there can be intermediaries, and there are sectors where technology acceptance is much higher than the others. For instance, if you ask layperson, what do you think, should we allow doctors to share data so that they could give us better treatments? About 80% say, yeah, sure, give them the data. I see that the return for that is good enough for me. But if I'm asking, should we give the airlines ability to share data about your travel patterns and things like that, then the acceptance rate of that goes much lower. So there can be some intermediaries, and there are some intermediaries we trust more. And there are some sectors where, as I said, in military, the commander-in-chief says, we must, And then everybody just goes with it, even if they doubt and are not happy and not agreeing as persons. Because of that power hierarchy, they're doing it. So there are different kinds of ways, and state oftentimes is a good intermediary to put more trust in technology. So states can help, but they can also help more if they are transparent and good communicators, if they're accepting problems, not just saying, oh, just under the carpet, don't look.
Linnar, do you agree with that last point?
Yes, very much. In addition to that, what Pille's work was mostly focusing was on societal acceptance from the perspective of the institutions and regulations. And one needs to make a clear distinction in between those two. One is the users, the actual beneficiaries of a particular technological solutions, the ones who really get their service, and then the institutions and regulations we have set up in different societies. And actually there are two types of ways of addressing the innovation. One is to think that how can I take a new technology to address the existing regulations and existing regulation and existing institution, work with those institutions and regulations, but make it work more efficiently. And second approach is that you totally forget about institutions. You start from the blank paper, you just try to solve a problem. And with that, you often challenge the regulations. Vast majority of the innovations in digital societies which we are using have been started and are taken up by challenging the existing regulations. I recall very well a historical moment when I was head of product at Skype, and we started to receive a court orders to appear to the court in one country or another country to explain how we comply with existing telecommunication regulations. And our solution was very simple. Our chief legal counsel said that all the communication addressed to Skype legal counsel needs to go directly to Schroecker. And when we get our 100 million customers, then we start opening those letters. Those letters were no longer about coming to court. Those letters were about receiving an awards of innovation. And that's a difference, I think, often in cases. And there are many, many other examples where we bluntly challenge existing legal regulations and institutions, and we find the shortcuts in different societies in a different way. And that work, what Pille was describing, is extremely important in my mind from the perspective that it's, in a sense, a lakmus to show the tolerance level of institutions. In that respect, doctor, for me, is also an institution. A lawyer is also an institution. And they can sometimes totally forget them when they get home and start surfing YouTube, that they are lawyers and doctors. Then they are just users of the internet, expecting more and better services to come to them.
Okay, so your point is that acceptance of new digital solutions need to be bottom-up, at least in the case of Skype.
There are many different examples. Some try to solve within the existing frameworks, and some try to forget the frameworks.
Okay.
And what we have seen around the world is that there is a mesh raising up in a borderless digital society from countries and from societies who tolerate a totally different level issues related, for example, the privacy.
So that's where the question of the context comes in, right? Ray, Mariagrazia, would you like to ask any question to Pille, where she's still on stage?
Yes, actually, I was very intrigued by the fact that all of you already put forward, let's say, the three key issues that we see about the digital transformation, which is the speed, the scale, and the scope. So the problem is not each one of them in isolation, is that the digital transformation is changing things at a speed that we haven't seen before, and is transforming basically everything. So, and that also linked to what you showed us, begs the question of uncertainty, because I think that's what we are talking about by the time. Actually, I was intrigued by the the very title of this session, that is social acceptance. I mean, you have to accept something when you don't like something, and you pose the question of acceptance when it's a challenge. Although the second part of the title said of digital solution. So we are implicitly saying there is a solution. Now, I don't underestimate the solutions that the digital transformation is offering, but I do see the challenges, and I think that unless we address those challenges, we might not get there the way we want to. And hence, that links also to what you were saying, the societal acceptance. And not everybody needs to accept it, but in order to buy it, for me the question becomes, do people have the right skill to make an informed decision? And how true is this in sight of the fact that populations are aging? This is very much the case in Europe. And we do know that older people are generally relatively less agile in dealing with digital technologies than younger people are.
I think the question of skills is an important one, and if that's okay, we'll leave it for the end, because it's also there are a few points that we can address also with the question of jobs and how to educate the society. But Ray, you wanted to come in.
I definitely have a question that I'd like to ask you, but I'd like to challenge my fellow panel over here. Sure. And I think we have to put everything in perspective, because when you talk about speed and the speed of transformation, it is challenging. It's challenging for the regulators, maybe, or it's challenging for the lawyers, as you highlighted, for them to keep up. But these technologies are not going to happen tomorrow. Robots are not going to come and cook my dinner tonight, and I'm not going to have a self-driving car that's going to pick me up. There's a lot of things that are missing. We're missing infrastructure. There's a lot of technologies that are not being mature enough. There's not enough broadband speed in a vast majority of the EU. Mm-hmm. These are you can't have a super fast train if you don't have the rails, and a lot of those rails are missing. And I think it's going to be, unfortunately, a long time before these technologies will have the infrastructure and have the investments needed, to be mature. And if you look at the mobile phone, for example, it took about 10 years before it digitized the first rail industry, which was the music industry, right? It took at least 10 years before the music industry woke up and realized that their whole sector had disappeared and become virtual. So. I think these things aren't going to turn things around that fast. And I think our adaptation to it, and this is probably the most important thing, and this is why looking at the previous discussion, listening to Pierce, listening to the Commission talking about data protection rules and why they're making these discussions a priority, is because we won't feel that change. No one felt over the 10 years that they're going to be, I got to throw out all my records because I'm going to be streaming. It wasn't an overnight thing. It happened slowly. It incorporates into your life. It embeds into your life, and you don't even realize it, right?
Okay, and you had a question.
I have a question for you. Yes, I was looking at the niche management section, and you said there are technologies that are in their infancies, and we got to protect them. I just want to get a view from you on which technologies you were referring to.
I'm not the right person really to answer that, but we're doing it already. We are protecting blockchain, we're protecting 5G, we're doing already a lot of protection of technologies, and some of those technologies are in such an infancy that they are still on the desks of different researchers. And some of them technologies are maybe somewhere a bit further ahead. Okay, 5G is a bit more further ahead maybe, but some of these technologies are really in the process of being imagined. And I wanted to really quickly also answer Mariagrazia's question about, do we have the knowledge? And their answer is no, there is not a single person in the world who would have that knowledge, but we can have that knowledge when we work together. Again, the ethical implications, the social implications, no single philosopher, no single social scientist, no single technology visionary can imagine all the implications. But if there is an increasing attention to cooperation in this, these things can be solved out. And I think we need to really take a bit more proactive role in collective imagining. Otherwise, the unforeseen happens so quietly in such a small increments that we wake up and the music industry has found a solution. They went to festivals. And they basically said that festivals, live concerts are actually one of the ways of overturning that digital, is putting the people back. So there are ways of working it, like really, oh, we are in crisis, we need to solve it. But also, like, we need to imagine what the next crisis is. And we need to really put an effort in that.
I think that's actually a very important point, because when we speak about new digital technologies, we project ourselves in a decade, or try to speak about self-driving cars. But some of the solutions, some of the digital technologies are already here. So we need to also to anticipate future technologies and tackle challenges related to today's technologies. Right? Are there any questions from the audience for Pille? No? Then I suggest that we move to the next presentation. Pille, thank you very much. I think we can go back. I'm sorry, it's not very easy, but otherwise you won't be able to see the presentation. And then I'd like to ask our next presenter, Kristjan Vassil, on stage. So you're the Vice Rector for Research at University of Tartu, and you're going to speak about the next generation of predictive e-services. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kristjan Vassil. I am the Vice Rector for Research of the University of Tartu, but here I'm more as a researcher, as a senior researcher of the same university and as a head of the Center of IT Impact Studies. What we do at our research center is we build prototypes of next generation of predictive e-services, and I would like to give you an example or the showcase of one of the pilots that we have done in the realm of real-time economic monitoring. But before going there, I figured, since we talked about in the last panel about the scope and speed of technologies, I wanted to give you a kind of broad understanding or the anchoring points of the scope of Estonian e-government ecosystem. So on the right-hand side graph, what you see is the evolution of digital e-services since the dawn of our e-government, since 2002. The data comes in since 2003. And as you see, there are currently about 1,800 digital public e-services available for Estonian residents. They are provided by about 1,000 institutions, mostly of public kind of type, but not only. Like some utility companies are also involved in there. And they are based on more than 200, almost 300 data repositories. These are the large data registries that really form the nucleus of any e-government ecosystem. This is the foundation upon which you can start building e-services. And on the left-hand side graph, you see what we call the bloodstream of the ecosystem, the number of transactions that occur annually within the ecosystem when people interact and use these services. So you see it has reached almost 600 million in the last 2 years, which is about 1.6 million queries per day in a population of 1.3 million. So you think Estonians are particularly keen in interacting with their government. I can assure you it's not the case necessarily as a country that is sparsely populated. It's not, there is no other way how we can efficiently render public services to all of our residents other than through digital means. So there is no viable alternative to that. Now these 1,800 public e-services, they are the digital clones of what we call the otherwise analogous services. They're basically digital replicas, where we have taken a conventional e-service and transformed into a digital world. They are better, they're cheaper, they're faster, but in essence, they are the same. They use the digital environment to do that. So I would like now to walk you through to a kind of a public e-service that we think, that we call as next generation, the next level of public services. And the example comes from Estonian Tax and Customs Board. We had the privilege and the mandate to work with them for 1 year to prototype the real-time economic monitoring application on the basis of 166,000 corporate tax declarations that our companies, Estonian companies, supply to the Tax and Customs Board every month. So that is a very fine-grained data set, an indicator of the economy that we are never using. So, what we did, we used the data that comes from the VAT tax declarations and the income and labor tax, which basically tell you what is the turnover of a company and how much they spend on labor. There are some auxiliary data sets also there, and our goal was to figure out whether we can build applications that are useful for policymakers, for enterprises, for small company owners, policymakers, and so on. So here's what we did. We basically built an application where all these data that companies supply to Estonian Tax and Customs Board are visualized in a descriptive format. We call this the dashboard of Estonian economy. It's not publicly available yet. It's available within the Tax and Customs Board. And what it basically shows you is the structure of an Estonian economy. Wholesale and retail, manufacturing, construction, real estate, information and communication, and so on. And you can build all kinds of KPIs on it. What is the number of how many companies are responsible for 80% of the turnover? What's the total profit? What's the profit per employee? What's the added value? And so on and so on. Not so interesting, you say, because this is simple descriptive statistics that anybody can do. Well, you're right, except it works in real time without any analytics involved at all. Because what we've done is that as companies provide the information to the government, we have just pre-structured the data so that it can be fed into the system and you can have a real-time understanding of the economy. And here's one of the first kind of unintended consequences that we never realized when building this system, is that this information does not belong to the Tax and Customs Board or the Statistics Estonia or the Central Bank or the Ministry of Finance, but it belongs to the people in the classroom in conventional education. Because in a way, we democratize access to otherwise unique information about the structure of the economy. This needs to be in classrooms, in civic education classes, and the like. You can do fun stuff with it. You can look at the entire turnover, long period since 2005, the time series. What is the total turnover of all Estonian companies, which is nothing else than macroeconomic picture. Because macroeconomics is nothing more than the aggregation of all the units in the economy. I know economists would disagree with that, but for the sake of an illustration, you see how the financial crisis of 2007 hit the economy, how severe it was. You can compare industries and look at the labor statistics. How was the economy hit by the crisis in terms of labor engagement? What is the structure of the age distribution in the entire economy and IT and telco? You can look at the growth of the median salary, how that has grown. And you can do that by interactively selecting the parameters that you are interested in. You can look at the added value in the entire economy and the IT and telco. You can see whether one sector outperforms the performance of another sector. Hell, you can look at the real time. In real time, you can look at the gender wage gap. No extra monitoring body needed it, because we already supply this information to the government. So this has been kind of the descriptive part. Now things become a little bit more complex. We also wanted to see whether we can do real-time forecasting, because this is something that is proprietary task of the central bank and the Ministry of Finance at this stage. And we use this for public budgeting, but the kind of peculiarity is that when we put together the public budget, it is based on the data that is already outdated at least 8 to 16 months. So there is no real-time kind of linkage between putting the public budget together and when the data is being actually generated. So what we built is a machine learning algorithm that basically takes, for example, one sector. This is industry. You can see how, again, the crisis hit the manufacturing industry. And we start building in time series models that first learn for the first few years the patterns in the data and then start issuing prediction scores 1 month, 6 months, 12 months ahead of time. And you can choose the parameters, whatever you want to have. You don't need any specific statistical or mathematics skills to do these kind of things. You see, this model doesn't work very well at times. So what we do, we don't rely on only one model, which is the common practice of the central bank or Ministry of Finance, because you always have analysts preferring one model to another. But in modern computational power, and with the machine learning approaches, you can use all the known models that are doing great job in predicting and doing forecasting on the basis of time series data. And you can use a narrow AI that selects those models at any particular time point that outperform the others without discarding the ones that at this particular time point don't actually do a good job in prediction. So you aggregate them together and you again make a tool that is based on real-time data with a simple user interface, a prototype that can be used by policymakers and those who study economics, basically. We look at how failure of one company affects the network, because the economy is nothing else than a number of interactions, a network. So here's a visualization of the network. I never have found network analysis to be particularly interesting because they are very beautiful but not very practical in terms of applications. Here's an example how we made use of network analysis. So this is a company that we are interested in. This is actually a real company in the middle of the ecocenter network. The company comes from the eastern part of Estonia, which is kind of socioeconomically a sensitive area. It's a large employer. If something would happen to that company, then could be dreadful consequences for the labor engagement, for the labor market in that region. So what we do, we eliminate this company. We basically take it off. We delete it. And what we see is the change in the effect or the impact to the economy of its disappearing, provided by its disappearing turnover and the disappearing turnover of its immediate partners in the network as a wave kind of explosion. You see what happens, what is the impact in turnover and in employment. We have built several applications, which I don't have the time to go through, but I think one of the really interesting ones is where we can simulate the impact of certain policies. When the company gets a state tuition, what would happen to its turnover or employment? So you have this counterfactual position. You can empirically, in real time, do estimations on that. We can do benchmarking. We can let employees to compare their performance to the likes of them or to the sector in which they operate. And they can in real time see whether they outperform the sector performance or not. Do they have to make changes, structural changes perhaps, to the way they run their business? We are extending these approaches to other services. This was real-time economic monitoring. We are currently working with the Rescue Board and Road Administration to see whether we can predict the occurrence of traffic accidents before they actually occur, and whether we can build in some policy implications, mobile alerts, or probability-based intervention solutions to make sure that less of those accidents will actually happen. We're working with projects with the Estonian Genome Center and one of the largest medical corporations, privately owned clinics in Estonia, to see whether we can predict type 2 diabetes before the first symptoms occur. And these all have implications toward the way we actually run policy. Universities are really important in this kind of innovation, because this is the only place where we actually equip our people with an incredibly and very well needed kind of skill sets. You cannot do any of it if you don't have an interdisciplinary team like this. It's not sufficient to have developers or front-end and UX designers. It's not sufficient to have mathematicians and data scientists, because they don't know what to put on the right-hand side of the equation if it comes to economic modeling. What are the actual variables that have to go into the model? So you need, if you want to go from proof of concept to the prototype and scaling, this is what you actually need. And this is something that I think it's important to understand, the linkage between what the universities are doing and why we are funding certain areas of research, and where we actually end up with designing and prototyping the next generation of public e-services. And I think what we are actually going to see in a very near future, and I would definitely disagree with one of the conclusions of the last panel, that technologies take too much time to be implemented. I think we are going to see in a very near future the emergence of algorithmic policy making and the appearance of predictive public e-services. Many, many thanks from my end.
Would you like to come back up? Please take a seat. Thank you. Very good. That's fine. I do have a question to kick off. So you said you were a researcher. Is the application or the applications, are they commercialized?
They're not commercialized, but we are. I mean, we have two rules in our research team. One is that we work and engage in projects that have life-saving capacities or that have capacities to bring structural changes to the society. And the other is that we all want to work with projects that could have a spin-off capacity, a kind of a commercialization value. And basically, we select the projects based on, at this stage, they are not interesting for the private kind of capital investment, because they are too foundational in nature. There's too much risk involved. And our goal is to arrive at a go, no-go decision whether they can be scaled up to a commercially viable solution or not.
Okay, but Estonia is often cited as example for its e-governance model. And here, obviously, I'm sure that the Ministry of Finance would be very interested in your tax declaration system, right? But then my question to you and Linnar is, what about the Estonian people? Is the e-governance model accepted in the Estonian society?
Well, if I would start, since 2006, Estonian society has, well, as in most of Europe, people don't trust politicians too much. The trust level towards the government is moderate. The trust level to e-government is high. So this is a paradox. It's the same thing, actually, which people trust more when it's in digital form. Yes. So we are a little bit weird in that sense. And in that sense also, the rest of the planet kind of has accepted that. We have had, for the last 10 years, delegations coming from all kinds of countries, enjoying the time in Estonia and looking to our e-governance. And we are kind of worldwide recognized as a kind of tolerable mistake, kind of acceptable statistical error within the public administration and government innovation models. They go home and say, this does not mean that we should do it if they do it in Estonia. And they are so right. Nobody is forced ever to do e-government like we have done in Estonia. Everybody has to do their own and much better one than we have done. This is really the reality. But Kristjan, you have also studied the acceptance and uptake of different services based on the kind of social acceptance models on individual basis. What you can...
I mean, you see, I think the major indicator of acceptance is really the evolution of the number of queries within the ecosystem of e-government. 600 million per year, although 2/3 of those are machine-to-machine interactions. It still remained 200 million still there in a country where every third vote is being cast online. So, I mean, you have these kind of I don't know, indicators of very strong social acceptance. But at the same time, we have a huge problem. It's not so much accepted digital technologies and used in private sectors. They flourish in certain industry areas, but not necessarily in manufacturing, not necessarily in those economic sectors that make up most of the volume of the economy. And that's a paradox, because in European countries, you always have exactly the opposite.
May I disagree with this? Because actually I think we should be careful in not reducing the digital transformation to one single item. I mean, digital technologies are a tale of many tales. And so you were mentioning, for instance, manufacturing is not much penetrated. Well, if you look at data, it's the only sector where robotics has a role to play. In services sectors, they don't. And robotics, for sure, is one of the key components of the digital transformation. If you look at the purchase of services, cloud, etc., is another thing that is very much used in manufacturing. So I think there is more to it. And perhaps they're not using some digital device in the way that you would expect them to, but they're using others. And I think there are really three components. That is the technology, the human capital, and the market. And not necessarily, actually, we have done analysis on that, and we see that the digital penetration differs across sectors, across the different items. Now, I have a question for you, if I may. And this, one thing I missed from your model, which was really fascinating, I would love to showcase also to the other countries, is the people component. I didn't see, but perhaps it's in there. Whether you had any indication by the time you had the shock analysis, that is, what happens if firm X vanishes? What happens to employment? Because that's one of the key questions that governments nowadays have to answer. And related to that was also the communication side in the interdisciplinary teams of things. Because I think one reason why acceptance of digital transformation is kind of not as fast as we might want it to be is because it's not communicated the right way.
Well, to start with the latter, I think things and solutions that are effective, usable, that reduce costs, don't need particular communication in its own right if they are really solving an essential problem. It is not, and it's kind of an exaggeration a little bit, but there is less communication needed or kind of substantive persuasion needed if there is a clear demand which the software or the algorithm, whatever, uses. And clearly, there are challenges that, if you talk about people, I think one of the key aspects that we are facing and dealing with it is that it renders the job of analysts, oftentimes, in those areas where the analysis is being made, obsolete. I mean, you don't need, central bank and the Ministry of Finance no longer needs those macroeconomists rendering models, these idiosyncratic models, in which they have kind of the monopoly at this stage. And an essential question then becomes, what will happen to these people? I mean, what are they going to do? Fortunately, this is not the case in an Estonian case. We have worked closely with both with the central bank and the ministry. They're very much interested. They'd rather do more reasonable things with their time than just render technical analysis over and over again. So perhaps in that sense, the communication part becomes more important.
Kristjan, let me be in opposition. Your argumentation was rational. Social acceptance is emotional. If people are have fear, if the same central bank macroeconomist have a fear, they find the solutions to avoid this stuff. If politicians have a fear about algorithmic policy impact, well, why should they be losing their role and status in society? If lawyers see that machines can help you contracting, why should they support it? And et cetera, et cetera. And so, once again, in between the rationally argumented, efficient, and even growth-driving opportunities delivered with existing digital technologies, and between the real use of them, in between those two, there are institutions. Institutions that are afraid about their present and nearby future existence. Well, the same models. Well, all the European budgets are public. All the European Commission budgets are public. All the information is available. What if we start running the same real-time impact analysis and also prediction models on the EU policies? Well, would the European Parliament be really happy about losing the opportunity and be just sitting in front of the monitor and screen and saying that, well, computer said vote yes. And you say, oh, well, with a 95% of probability, if I say yes, things get better. Well, what is my role then left? Well,
I completely agree, and it was an exaggeration from my end. I think a particularly good example was that Pille gave before, or Jaak was due, about using neural net to detect whether the cancer is is benign or not. That is where as Pille said, the doctors may not use this solution because that would simply undermine their otherwise monopolistic decision-making opportunity over that. And in that case, clearly, communication is perhaps even more important than the prototype or the useful model on its own.
Right.
Yeah, just I think we're touching on it. I think we're going to start moving to skills at some point.
Yeah.
But this idea that what he has created is just going to wipe off hundreds, thousands, who knows, of economic analysts. The OECD may shut down. I don't know. I don't think so. I think there's just the terminology and the language of these technologies are wrong, right? You've created a visualization of a very smart computational model, a calculator. That's very smart, visualizes, help you think about things, and has now predictive capability. You need people to analyze that and understand that and create smart things and create the right policies. But I think the language is wrong. I think these are human assistive technologies. They help us, right? To do the job. They don't replace us, right? And I think that level of fear and misunderstanding is skewing the debate in the wrong direction. And it's not allowing us to address what needs to be done, where the skills need to go, where the education. I don't want to jump ahead, but I think getting this right, yeah, removing the fear, you'll get the right policies. And we hear today, we heard the Commission talking about skills and being very proactive about this, but I'll stop there because I know you want to introduce that properly.
Good. Just if you want to respond to that, and then we will move on. So,
very shortly,
yeah.
I think you're absolutely correct. The discussion is going the wrong way if we focus on models like this replacing people. This is not the point. The point is to provide services that would never been able to emerge without the effect of the second machine age, the provision of data instead of cross-sectionally one point at a time, but as a stream data. And we can harness this opportunity with these smart models. This is the main point. Whether or not it will render some positions or professions obsolete or not, We've seen that at least a few times in history where some jobs disappear and emerge as others, so fully.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Kristjan. You can go back. I think we're going to have to speak about skills now. But who are we educating? That would be my first question. Is it everyone in schools or everyone in everyday life that needs to be in touch with technology in their everyday life? Or are we training engineers or technology specialists to cope with these new demands and these new jobs that are profiling? Doris, please, you want to speak.
If I could come in, what we just heard actually was really kind of evidence-based policy making in its essence.
Okay.
And I think every policymaker or every program manager would love to have a system like this. And it goes along with a lot of responsibility as well. And I think what goes beyond and what leads us then to the skills and actually to the respect for the people also, and to see what choice we can offer them by, you said, saying no as well sometimes, is actually the aspect of values. And I think this is where the societal context comes in terms of making the difference between maybe acceptance and endorsement. Mm-hmm. Because what we would wish is actually an endorsement for the benefits, but this depends on how much you can show and demonstrate and understand the benefits as well. So I think it's this give and take. And coming to skills, it's probably that you can't limit it. Everybody needs to know something about it. And the question is more like, what is relevant for different people? And where do you start? Because we have a lot of skills discussion about the educational system. Yeah. And what do kids need to learn? But what is it really? I mean, how much do you gain by learning a programming language as compared to learning how to use the mass of information you have actually when you go on the internet? How do you learn to have a critical approach to that, to select, to find actually what you're looking for? So that's one thing. And the other one is that I think all of us need to learn in a way that it's becoming state of the art. You need to keep up with state of the art. And then, of course, you have this research and innovation element where you want to go beyond that, and where you also where the private sector wants to get the new level of competitiveness out of digital and other advanced technologies, where you need to think about special skills programs. But I think the most important is always to think inclusiveness, and to look for whom are we targeting and what do we expect from the people. And I think it's good that we discuss, maybe even before the technologies are so mature that it's really coming like tonight, because we can prepare ourselves for that. Mm-hmm. And we get a feeling for what to expect, what risks, what is manageable, what could become as a surprise, so that once we get these surprises, we are kind of mentally prepared that this might come.
But how do we get prepared? Is it doing by learning? Learning by doing? Is it because it would be there would be a teaching program at school? Or how does it work in practice? We can prepare ourselves, but we need to have a way to do it. So that needs to come from somewhere. Ray, you want to come in?
Well, yes, I can try to address that question. I fully agree with you. You know, it's we've been talking about skills in the industry for almost a decade. Mm-hmm. Today, I was flabbergasted to see it as a top priority in the EU. So congratulations, you know, to the Commission. Thank you very much. And it's now being addressed as it needs to be. And it's a pyramid. So you have, at the bottom, you have everyone. We need to be inclusive, as you said. There's 20,000, you know, Catalonians out there protesting, right? What is happening in their country, unfortunately, is that the young people are not getting skills. But in the next couple of years, there's going to be over 1 million job availabilities. So something is going wrong here. You know, the ability for that, you know, inclusiveness is not happening fast enough. And youth are unfortunately, the people who are going to pay our pensions are not being trained. And the level of of basic skills. Again, it's a commission number I saw, which was staggering. And believe it or not, basic skills is the ability to send an email. I'm serious. Opening Excel or doing a video conference. Supposedly 40% of the EU population cannot do this, right? Is that true? You know, so, and then we start working up the ladder, right? And that's when it starts getting competitiveness. Who's going to be doing the AI? Who's going to be doing the cybersecurity? Because we can all talk about cybersecurity until we're blue in the face. But if we don't have the researchers or the money going in there and those researchers developing those technologies, then we're going to fall behind.
Okay, and
But to address the question?
no, go ahead.
Okay, very quickly. I think it's I don't have the answer, but it's a very dynamic world. My son, you know, he's 10 years old, and he's coding and doing advanced physics from YouTube, coding academies that are free, right? You know, he's having Skypes with, you know, teachers, you know, in Eastern Europe. I'm trying to monitor this stuff, but, you know, it's... and he's a real geek. But, you know, unfortunately, in his school, he's forced to learn, you know, German and economics. And I'm nothing against Germans. You know, German is a great, beautiful language. Economics is an important discipline. But he wants to learn physics. He wants to learn coding. He wants to learn, you know, advanced mathematics. He wants to do science. He can't, because in France, he's not allowed. So things have to change, right? Or at least in my region in France, he's not allowed. So, you know, things have to change to allow a little bit more flexibility so that, you know, the students who have an aptitude or want to can, you know, start embracing, you know, STEM, you know, science, technology, mathematical type skills.
Okay. And so staying on the question of responsibility, and Pille, you want to come in?
Yeah,
please.
Is my mic on? Yeah.
Yeah,
I just wanted to comment because I love the fascination around STEM, but Kristjan's model indicated, and sort of I wanted to add to Kristjan's model that we need anthropologists, we need philosophers, we need people who will question the ethics of these things. We will need people who will say, okay, if we do this kind of algorithmic computations, this is what's going to sort of be part of societal change. And if we put all our, and I'd have nothing against the idea that children should be allowed to learn as much programming or as much physics as they want. Children should be allowed to learn anything that they want. But at the same time, I'm really against this idea that we can streamline any kind of education. Because I think part of our problem is that a lot of these decisions have now been made by people in STEM, by people in programming algorithms, and not thinking about the long-term consequences, not thinking about the societal implications. And there's been recently an interesting article how the tech, the unfinished education of the tech industry people in US has actually sort of being part of this problem causing that we are facing. So I think everybody should also learn ethics, philosophy, history, and probably a bit German.
Sociology. Okay. Then, Linnar, I had a question for you. You've been an expert, an advisor to the Estonian government as well on this question of digital skills, right? So how did Estonia tackle this question of educating the people to get them, to have them equipped with for digital technologies?
Well, looking back to the history, probably not too well, because still, if we look what is the digital dividends in terms of increase of productivity and value added in economy, we have not achieved what we could have achieved. But the early understanding was very clear and very simple, and that dates back already now almost 20 years, understanding that there is a role for the formal education system to play if we want to address the particular technologies to all the generation. Well, we can't do anything about right now with the people in the age of 35, except trying to address them, but the education is a must in that sense. And the fact that older generation, whatever will be their future, were taught in basic education system how to use internet and computers. It changed actually the generations, and it was kind of a tsunami wave. You can imagine that suddenly you have people with 100% of internet skills kind of moving in your society, becoming older and older and older, going universities, becoming a taxi drivers, becoming a nurses, going to shops, and they all have 100% have a certain skill. And that is something which we need also to think about with present and future technologies. And this is why in Estonia, at least, we are preparing right now a kind of technology observation approach where at least those technologies which we foresee that will be in physical contact with society, at least in terms of for 20% of society, they need to be also introduced to society, if possible, already in the school level. But this is about the basic skills and acceptance. This is a kind of the lowest level. Mm-hmm. And the understanding of that approach is that the future will be digital, but we are the users, we are not the builders. The next layers, of course, are most important, and this is exactly what right now the most important topic in discussion about digital skills and skills about the future in Europe is also taking place. Who are the people who are using it for the benefit of their jobs, making better their jobs? And finally, who are those people who build those new technologies? Because if we're talking only about social acceptance of technologies, and the fact that somebody is making a solution which needs to be communicated and sold somehow to everybody, then the digital future looks like my hair. It's not equally distributed, I would say, and there is only a little of that.
And then I have a question. So I'm close to 35, and in principle, by the time self-driving cars will be there, I'll be still in age of driving. Who is going to teach me?
Well, you mentioned that we don't have the infrastructure for self-driving cars. I had this summer the most horrible experience of my life. I have been, by the way, jumping with a parachute in military and driving with a self-driving car in California. In Stanford, this was the worst experience of my life because I was so afraid. I had kind of later I looked. I had 10 blue dots on my legs when I went to the shower later, and I was fully sweat. It was so horrible experience. And I still think my daughter will never get a driver's license. And I think this is something which we can talk about the future probably. I went to my grandaunt and talked to her. Tell me how you went with a kind of horses to a song festival 70 kilometers away, and you had a several days trip. Probably my grandchildren will come to me and granddaddy, tell me how it was that you were driving cars, human beings. 2.5 tons of metal, and you were killing each other every day. Wow, tell me. And this is something which we can already predict about the nearby future, and that's about the kind of big social acceptance. But this is not talking about who is building that self-driving car, who is really making an economic and social benefit out of that. And this requires one institution which we still need to focus on and to finance stronger, and this is a university. This is an only neutral environment which can deliver us those skills needed for the future to create those new technologies and to make benefit of those technologies. Acceptance, this is next layer.
May I add one thing? I'm really surprised that you say you were really nervous, because I'm sure you've taken several planes, and typically planes, exactly. by the time they are airborne, there is nobody doing anything.
Exactly.
So the pilot is enjoying a drink, the co-pilot is just talking on the radio. So why would you be scared by the time you're in a driverless car and not when you're on a plane, which, by the way, to me, it's slightly more scary. But I think the point here, going back to the different things that were said, is really that perhaps we need to reconsider what education can do and what lifelong learning needs to do. Because I disagree with the idea of having this massive investment at the beginning of the life of a person. You said in universities are important. They are important, but perhaps we have put way too little emphasis on the need to continue learning over time. And what the digital transformation and the fact that these new technologies continue to come day by day, and they are new, and we cannot really foresee all of them, means that in several points in time in our life, we will need to learn, relearn, retrain, reskill, upskill. And this is also true for a number of reasons, not only because of the job, because, I mean, people are scared about losing their jobs to automation, but estimates show that 70% of the population will see their jobs changed in different ways or forms. This has already happened. There is nothing new there. The difference is that there is more and more the need to interact with the digital tools, to master them. And actually, by the way, we have done research looking at how complementary different skills are, and you would be surprised to see that in extremely digital intensive industries, communication skills are those that get rewarded the most in conjunction with ICT skills. So interdisciplinarity is going to be a challenge, but then I think the next challenge, in addition to try and sort out something that is very complex, that is the right balance between initial education and lifelong learning, is who will train the trainers? Do we think that we have an educational setting, professors, teachers, etc., that is prepared to do so? Also, if you look at the existing studies, we know very little about how adults learn. And all of us, we will need to be trained. I mean, we get continuously new things, and we need to learn about them. And if anything, if I may close with two things that I think are going to be key, but it's really in the initial stage of the discussion, is how to learn how to learn. We don't know much about that. And the other one is how to screen for information, because one thing we always kind of hide in the back when discussing about digital technologies is that they supply us with an enormous amount of information. Are really people able to screen efficiently and effectively through them? That's an open question. And actually seeing how people react to things, perhaps often and too often the answer is no.
Doris, and then we'll take questions from the audience if there are
what
any.
I see in our areas, so there is policies, we call it the European Digital Skills Agenda or the European Skills Agenda, and what we are trying to do is really to go out and to take technologies, knowledge, innovation to people, and also to create space for experience. So if I would talk to a technician or to a researcher, I would call it a pilot line or a test bed or something like this. If I talk to a person, I would say, look what that can do for you. So I think it's really a matter of how to present it, and we call them innovation hubs. And so we try, and many member states work on that also, and we try to network it as well to create spaces of experience that somebody who doesn't know what it is has at least a place or a phone number or a contact or a university to go to, and to lower the barriers there. And I think this is very, very important. And what we see with digitization, and that is an advantage which we haven't addressed yet, is it's not only around the corner. And I think this is also something we need to learn, that people go out and there are no borders anymore. And the identity changes as well. People living in cities across the world have more with each other to do and are more similar than people with their own fellow country people. So I think this is something where it's changing our life. And I think this is also the big difference between automation and digitization, because digitization is should support us in the way we live. And automation, of course, is a lot about replacement, but that's not the purpose, because the beauty which we see in that as well, and we hope that we can really capture that, is that it's not about making faster and more efficient and maybe with less people the things we have been doing for already. It's about creating the world we want in a way which these technologies allow as well. through connectedness, through individualization, through collaboration in a way which hasn't been possible before. And if you look at the power of social media and what individual people can do, also in good, because there's a lot of discussion about things now at the moment, I think this is powerful, and I think it's the responsibility and of policymakers, but of all of us using it to capture the positive elements there, and to use the power of that as well to block other forces.
Okay, thank you for addressing that as well. Are there any questions from the audience? Yes, there is one over there. Can you please identify yourself?
Good afternoon, Martin Bohle, DG Research, European Commission. I have a question which builds on the interesting graph which we saw about the uptake of the e-services, the number of services, the number of data platforms, the number of users. These curves are still going up, so there's no saturation level seen. So we may end a point having one e-service by 500 heads, the same density as we normally have hairdressers, independent of the number of hairs which we have on the head. Against that background, for me, Estonia has a very unique experience, and from which I would learn on one aspect more. You, showing by these figures, in the end, force e-services on your population, to put it bluntly, simplified. So what is the differential uptake in areas, be it by substance, be it by geographic setting, be it by remoteness, be it by others, where people still have a choice to go for the e-service or to go for an alternative options? Do you have any know-how and insight into this diversity? Because I believe from that we can learn essentially what makes people taking up and what makes people hindering the. I come from a rural town in Germany, and I know many people still like to go to the town's office to get a certain service and have a chat with the people there. So just as illustration for the background. So what do Estonians in a particular situation, when they still have the chance to go for the e-service or to go for something else?
Okay, I think it's actually an open question. I think the two presenters may want also to answer. So, Linnar, do you want to then? I think we will wrap up after you answer.
My first and immediate response is that whatever Estonians do and prefer has nothing to do with what the rest of the world is doing, because every uptake of every different digital solution is so much tied not to the technologies you are using, but to the social, cultural, regulatory, sometimes even religious context. So those are, well, with our e-governance academy, we work with more than 50 different countries, helping governments on the digital transformation. The technology is exactly the same everywhere. In Africa, they are using shortcuts and innovations on public administration we could never imagine. And in the same time, in vast majority of OECD countries, society still accepts that the burden or the cost of public administration as a proportion to the GDP can remain the same. And people like sometimes some services, not like some services to be delivered online, ask about privacy, ask about risks. And once again, my conclusion is every society, every culture, every nation has its different roadmap towards the digital solutions. And some go faster. Many go faster than Estonia has ever done. But maybe my other colleagues would like to contribute to that, especially what is so different in Estonians. Maybe Pille.
A final short comment, please.
The final short comment to say that, okay, there is more education in Estonia than many other countries.
More education, you mean?
Literacy.
Literacy, yeah.
Basic literacy levels are relatively high in the country, and that actually helps with technologies. And weirdly enough, the more rural and the more distant parts of Estonia are also lagging behind. So I don't think there's any service that's completely cut off from so there is always, at the moment, all these public services, all those 1,800 can also be conducted by an officer. They're made really uncomfortable with very short opening to hours, with very difficult to connect buses and all these kind of additional kind of tweaks into this kind of system. But all of them, you can still principally go to the office and get to do. Also, I don't know, the Nordic nature of people really being shy and not really wanting to talk to other people, this also helps, because you can then conduct your business online and not really have to look in anyone's eye. And the horrible weather. All these kind of like, again, we're gonna never achieve the Spanish way or the Italian way of sitting in the street cafeterias and chatting and solving problems that way. We have to figure out a difference. So totally agree with Linnar. We really, there's no single like silver bullet that we just apply that and things will be fixed. And sometimes the rational bit helps, but oftentimes it doesn't really, not even in Estonia.
Thank you. I think it's a good conclusion. Thank you. Thank you to all of you. So before I give the floor to Indrek for conclusions, stay here because it was Saint Nicolas yesterday and Christmas is around the corner. There are a few presents. Okay, thank you. So there are 2 packs, one for women, one for men, so I need to be careful. Here.
Thank you.
It was supposed to be women-only panel.
Thank you.
And now you are.
No, you were always here since the beginning. You were meant to be very well surrounded. There you go.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
And here.
You want to stay here?
Can we? Yeah.
All right. Indrek, I think the conclusions are yours. Thank you very much. So I'll just introduce our last speaker, Indrek Reimand, the Deputy Secretary General for Higher Education and Research at the Estonian Ministry for Education and Research. And I'll give you the floor for concluding remarks. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you. As I understood, I am the last obstacle before reception, so I tried to do fast. Well, I thank you all the speakers and panelists for the rewarding examples and discussion on some ways of embedding the digital into solving societal challenges. There are, of course, many more, and there will be many, many more in the future, most probably. It is very hard to conclude, but I try. What did I learn here? Well, digital progress is transforming our societies and the economies to the core, challenging the effectiveness of previously developed policies in a broad range of areas, as well as the role and function of the public administration overall. But at the same time also making obvious the necessity to develop new policies and practices. Drawing on the showcases and the panel discussions held, I would like to emphasize the importance of research, of digital technologies and education, but as well the importance of dialogue with society in bringing the digital and the physical together. One important aspect of it is the free movement of data and knowledge, and we need to move on with opening up the results of research. Research, development and innovation system creates and operates a vast amount of data, which is exponentially growing every year. We have to take full advantage of this data existing and generating in research, development and innovation system. In order to do so, we need to be able to handle big data, copyright issues, data localization, moving data across borders, and data security issues, among others. But if we can that, then, for example, medicine can save more human lives and boost the quality of lives of many. Well, second, much work must be done on communicating the benefits of the inclusion of the digital domain. We have an important task in binding together the society and research, development and innovation. The society will only endorse the changes if it understands and accepts it. Societal acceptance of digital solutions needs to be studied and new benefits explained to society. By the way, we already have a lot of technologies already developed. For example, in framework programs or other research done. Well, new risks certainly arise, but they are no bigger than the risks of the analog world. They are just new and different. What I learned was that the most dangerous place is home. If we don't go out and don't meet the new challenges, then, well, we are in danger. Also, what I learned was that digitalization is not only making old-fashioned services in a digital way. There are new ones going after the traditional possibilities. And also what was, well, I think a dominant topic in our discussions is that there is very big importance of interdisciplinary action. We speak about technologies and hard sciences, but as well we need human sciences, social sciences as well to take into account. And after all, we should not forget that if we talk about global issues, social challenges which we want to embed, then those issues are mostly of social nature, social effects of something. But whether it is climate change, demographic problems, or the depletion of resources, but the solutions, what we try to find to them, are mostly technological. So, and digital technology is just one overwhelming technology of this. Well, I want to thank you very much for the interesting conference.
Would you like to invite them to the
Well, and now I have an announcement that we will have networking receptions right at the hall, I think. Well, thank you.